I was talking to you recently about the Spanish, selling the Spanish rights. You already sold the Spanish rights to Kings of the Wild, and then you just recently confirmed that Bloody Rose is going to be printed this fall.
Yeah.
Um, what does that say to you about sort of like the global reach of science fiction and fantasy in terms of the way that so many of these books are being translated and permeating across different cultures and countries and languages? And also, how do you feel personally about your work being translated into different languages?
Another excellent question, my friend. I should also apologize for my foolish lighting. I mean, the sun has set. I
Well,
was,
dude, you don't have tattoo lighting like I
yeah,
do, so
I was relying on the sun to bring out my baby blues, but
it's okay, man.
so now it's
It's
just a lamp on one side and a hockey game on the other.
okay. It's just like a nice blue light from the TV and then a lamp on the other side.
Perfect. Anyways, what was the question? Just kidding. I remember it. So I mean, like, I'm overjoyed about like having things like the Spanish edition and things like that. And I think a lot of it can depend on who publishes it, what the translation is, who does the translating. I've had, versions of it where people are like, this translation wasn't that accurate. And with something like the Spanish one, it was done by a guy who was like a huge fan and a kind of a friend of mine beforehand. And he actually knew before I did that it was going to be translated into Spanish. He was like, listen, I know people in the industry, you're getting a Spanish deal. Can you please ask them if I can translate it? And I was like, well, I hope you're right, buddy. And then sure enough, 2 weeks later, I did get one. And yeah, he translated it. And he more than anyone else, like, would constantly write me emails and say, what about this? What about this? What should I change this to? What do you think about this? And so we went back and forth on a lot of stuff. And from what I understand, the Spanish translation is really a good one, and one that a lot of people seem to like resonate with.
I'm gonna have to pick it up in Spanish just
Yeah,
to see how it translates.
yeah.
Because
So
I'm really curious about certain uh, when it comes to translation, how certain words get translated. I don't know why just owl bear popped into my head.
yeah,
But in Spanish it would be oso, which is bear, and then búho, which is owl. So it'd just be like oso búho, like one word.
it
I have
works.
no idea, man.
And I know he tried to, like, if something had to be changed, he tried to still like make it a music reference and things like that. So
Hmm.
yeah, he was working. He was definitely working hard on it, kind of thing. But the same goes for like obviously a lot of English books gets translated and go around the world and things like that. And the same goes for Spanish books. Um, for me, creatively, like, I take so much from like Japan and what they produce. And if I wasn't getting media from them, I wouldn't be producing the stuff that I'm producing,
Hmm.
or enjoying my life half as much without anime and
And
uh,
video games.
in video games. I don't read like the manga really, but obviously that influences a lot of people and influences a lot of the people that have created things that I like in the Western world. So yeah, I'm all for the sharing of
Yeah, I
like.
mean it's this beautiful sort of cross pollination of cultures. You know, obviously there's a point where you can get to very blatant cultural appropriation type
Yeah,
stuff, but I think so long as things are done with respect and it's done sort of in communication with another culture as opposed to um, telling them like this is how it is,
mhm,
or like my perspective is more important than your perspective, then it's really beneficial and really fluid for these things to just sort of like translate from one culture to another. In your case, if the translation is done very well, it's a much more seamless
yeah,
process. Yeah.
yeah.
But I
And
mean,
sometimes I think it's maybe just recognizing what's not your story to tell at the moment.
yeah.
Like, there was a time, and not that it was ever necessarily right, but if there was going to be a book that was popular in America about that was like a Japanese fantasy book, a white guy was probably going to write it.
Hmm.
Um, but nowadays, it's just you can instead not write that story and amplify people that are writing those stories because they're
Yeah.
out there.
Yeah.
and they just weren't getting the chance to kind of shine before.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, in that sense, what do you think of like the state of science fiction and fantasy today? And like, what are some more positive trends that are hitting the industry?
Well, I mean, diversity obviously is the biggest one. Like I said, getting to read books that draw upon other cultures but make it fantasy is awesome. You know, like it's so cool. And even if someone did it before, they didn't do it with the same sort of authenticity that it's being done nowadays.
Hmm.
And just writing nowadays is so much better than it was, especially like 50 years ago. I mean, a lot of people would disagree with that, but it's true. You know, the same goes for. I'm like that with everything. Just because something's old doesn't mean it's good.
Well,
You know,
we'll get to music at some point. That might be a different story.
yeah,
But
yeah, like, it might be a different story. But the same, God, like things like movies. Like I remember watching Casablanca for this first time and being like, "This is people don't talk like this. This isn't realistic. This is nothing about this is any good because maybe like the cinematography,
mhm.
you know, the writing can be good, but the acting, like you know, compared to like Matthew McConaughey crying in front of his space monitor in Interstellar.
Yeah,
It's not on a different fucking level. Like
yeah,
no one was doing that. No one was
exactly.
showing real.
Well, quick aside, I don't know if you know that in Hollywood back in the once it was transitioning out of the silent movie
Yeah,
era into black and white films, and they had to start recording the voices of people. There were so many actors whose voices were just terrible. So they had to go through sort of like Hollywood-wide elocution lessons in order to get them to talk in such a way. And so
yeah,
that's why so many of these old movies, it's for me, it's a bit unbearable to listen to them where they're not talking like this, you say, and ha 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 ha. And the women are talking sort of like they're a bit British, but not really.
yeah,
It's all the result of the transition out of silent era and
yeah,
into this elocution heavy but ultimately homogenous thing that resulted in pretty mediocre
yeah.
variety.
If you're showing emotion, it just wasn't the same. You know,
No.
like yeah, I'm not gonna say like I wouldn't say they're like terrible movies, but you know, I haven't even seen that movie where um, about Tanya Harding. You know,
No,
where
I haven't seen it either.
but I guarantee you that the acting in that movie is better than the acting in any movie that
Oh,
took
for
place
sure.
1960s. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like yeah, I don't know.
Well,
Like
back,
I think a lot is similar to writing. Like obviously there was a lot of great books, and like Lord of the Rings is a phenomenal book, but there's no real emotion in Lord of the Rings. It's all
no.
very kind of distant and stoic. Um, it's not the same. You can definitely infuse it. Obviously, lines like "I'm glad you're here with me, Sam." Here at the end of all things, like these were real
Mm-hmm.
people writing stories, but it's not the same as nowadays. Where if you read a book that's going to get you, like rip your heart out, they're really going to rip your heart out. Like
Yeah.
you know, in a way that people back then just they didn't because it hadn't kind of evolved. But
I think maybe that's a transition out of the era of omnipotent um, narrators and sort of like POVs towards something that's, you know, whether you see it in YA where it's like first person limited, super intense, really emotional. This is what I'm feeling because I'm a teenager and just hormones and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Um, towards people who are really mixing it up and including multiple perspectives, multiple POV styles in a single book. So it's not just necessarily diversity in voices and the sort of stories that are being told and cultures that are being included, but also diversity in terms of the way things are being told.
100%. Like and having like characters that are like vulnerable and flawed. Like how much would it Lord of the Rings? How much better would it be if at Weathertop after the fight, Frodo stumbles upon Aragorn and he's there with his like head in his face in his hands, sobbing because he doesn't think he's up to like you know he has
Be
another.
King, yeah,
That'd be more realistic, way more
yeah,
realistic. It would
yeah,
have humanized that character so much more and
yeah.
made everything good afterwards.
Or if Legolas and Gimli, who overcome the unbearable odds of a dwarf and an elf becoming friends, what if all of a sudden just Legolas gets fucking killed And
Yeah.
Gimli's just wrecked.
But
Yeah.
what if Sam and Frodo just kissed, for God's sake? I mean, come on.
I mean, if that were written today, that's probably what would have happened. They would have been like on the fires of Mount Doom
Yeah. The
and just be
Eagles would have
like,
erupted.
you know,
Yeah.
and Frodo would have said, you know, Sam, I'm glad you're with me. And Sam would have been like, all right, man.
Yeah.
Well, me too. Me
Yeah.
too. And just like, give me your tongue.
Yeah. Yeah. But oh well. We'll get better books in the future, I hope.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a cool thing about this genre is it's consistently progressing, getting better and better and better. You
Yeah,
know,
and science fiction is a good example of that too, because science fiction, like obviously there were amazing books written back then, but they were so like science fiction had a so cold and sterile
yeah,
and cool, but
all about
not
the ideas, but not about the humanity, essentially.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so nowadays you're getting a mix of both, I think. And
Hmm. Actually, yeah, that was something that I was discussing with, excuse me, with some of the other writers at Fanfi Addict is what what kind of a reader are you? You know, are you more about plot? Are you more about character? And that really got me thinking, just like what books recently that I've absolutely adored and why I got into them. Like, what was the thing about it that really drew me in?
mm,
And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, cool, the plot is awesome. The concepts are really interesting, but it's the characters and their context within that world that make me invested in what's happening,
yeah,
you know? And I think that is easily one of the best trends is this interplay between plot and concepts and world building and character. And when, depending on which kind of reader it is, the sort of mix of ingredients, like the percentages of that recipe caters to a person and someone is going to say, holy shit, this is like exactly what I was looking for,
yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah. There's just so much more out there that people can kind of draw upon now,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, like speaking of Kings of the Wild, for instance, or Bloody Rose, you know, I was re-listening to your interview last year with David, just to sort of get an idea of what you guys talked about, and not to talk about too many of the same things, or ask the exact same question.
Well, we've covered a lot of stuff but I've never covered before on this one. So
Yeah, well, that's what I figured. Since we're friends, we might talk about some weird stuff. But
yeah,
um, it was there's one question that he had where he was asking you sort of about um, the way in which you wrote Kings of the Wild and how you just sort of vomited figuratively a lot of the world and everything around the characters onto the page as you're writing, not necessarily like you mapped out so much of the world beforehand, but you more pantsed it and just went for it. And how regardless, the world really comes out as this behind the scenes living breathing thing despite the books being so character centric.
yeah.
So for you, how did you? I mean, looking back on it, how do you feel about that sort of balance? And
Well, I think like yeah, I mean I was kind of fortunate in the fact that I did bare bones it. I did just write the story, and if I needed a backstory, I just wrote it on in the moment. Um, and I was fortunate in that Orbit asked me to add 50,000 words in the end. So most of those 50,000 words were the bad guy, Last Leaf, and all his scenes.
mm-hmm.
But the rest of it was all world building stuff, whether it was just a small paragraph here or there
Mm-hmm.
that would inform without interrupting the pacing. Um, but ultimately, like you said, like if you've got characters that feel real, then it almost like infers that the world they're in is real, and you
Mm-hmm.
don't need to say any more about it because when you read a book, say it's a modern literature book and it's about someone from Montreal or Boston or wherever they're from, and they're like living their life, it's like you don't care about they mention, oh, I have a cousin from Philadelphia. You're not like, oh, what's Philadelphia? I better look up where that is on the map. Like you don't need to. And the same goes for fantasy books. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I get lost in the names, and it's like, don't get lost in the names. Ignore the names unless you need to know it. An author will let you know it again.
Yeah.
Just ignore the names.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think if you concentrate on character and those characters feel believable, then you just kind of assume that everything is functioning around them.
Yeah. I mean, for me, that's such a beautiful thing about creativity is the ability for our minds to essentially take something that we see in front of us, whether it's a painting or a TV show or a book, etc., or even just out in nature where you see a tree and you see the entire structure of this tree, the leaves and the trunk and stuff, but you don't see everything that's going on inside.
Yeah.
But you infer what could be happening inside, and your imagination just goes wild with all the possibilities. And it's this really cool interactive interplay between the consumer and the creator, or the tree and the person, to say like, I'm looking at this thing and I'm observing it and I'm interacting with it, but then I, in my mind, am imagining what's going on behind the scenes. There could be a squirrel living inside that trunk, or there could be like ants and stuff crawling all over that, or something like that.
Yeah. And I had the benefit in Kings of the Wild of like that it's a story of people who have a glorious past, so I could constantly reference things in their glorious past, and that would kind of, I think, make the world feel more believable too, just because you got the names of people, you got the names of places, you got the sense that there was a history there. And it wasn't done through world building, it was done through character.
Exactly. Yeah, and it feels natural because you just, through the way that you wrote these characters and the way that they're interacting right now, you can infer, such and such characters have a bit of a harried past, because the way that they're interacting now, there's a bit more, just a bit more roadblock, a bit more of this hurdle of past aggressions or conflict that haven't necessarily been resolved.
Yeah. And because they're coming back into the world and they're like, oh shit, things are really different now. That alone gives the reader the sense that, oh, things were different before. Like, bam, you got yourself a world that's changed since these characters interacted with it. So that automatically feels real too.
Yeah, and it's perfect. I mean,
this was conscious, by the way. I just looked in.
Well, no, I mean that's kind of something I wanted to talk to you about, is just this idea of creativity and ideas, and how we just absorb so much. You're talking about your inspiration from Japan, for instance. We absorb so many different things from so many different places.
Yeah.
That no matter what, it's an absolute guarantee that everyone will succumb to tropes. Everyone will succumb to sort of repeated character types or plot structures, that kind of thing. But just the way that we absorb things naturally, and then the way that creativity works, I wanted to get your idea on that sense of like what we absorb versus what we create, and how those two things interact.
Well, I mean, every writer in the history of time will eventually write the line, so-and-so held or let out a breath they didn't know they'd been holding. That's one of those things I saw it on. I know I've used it probably at least 3 times, and I saw it on Reddit, and it was like people just tearing that fucking line a new one. And I'm like, well, I didn't realize it was so hated, At the same time, how's your book coming along, asshole? Like,
actually, quick aside, I watched, you do know Murphy Napier? She's a she's a booktuber, and she released a video today that was about like this word that she fucking despises, and I just laughed so hard. Essentially, it comes down to her just sheer, just innate dislike of the word undulate.
Okay. Yeah.
And how it's so misused in different contexts, about how like a woman and her curvy body undulate, and then she mimed it out, and she's just like, so you undulate like this? Like a woman
Yeah,
doesn't fucking undulate.
yeah,
And it's just these funny things that kind of come through. And funnily enough, the Dresden Files and Brandon Sanderson were very much abusers of the word undulate.
yeah. I mean, there's things in every book that I'm definitely picky about word choice. Um, my my editor was like, she was like, I've never met anyone who's so nitpicky about using the same word twice within a few pages. Like,
Mhm.
I'm so anal about it, and it happens. I think it's happened a couple times. They slip through me, and it depends on the word, obviously. But depending on the word, there's like a larger space of time for me as to when you can use it.
Mhm.
Like my favorite word of all time is inexorable. I remember the first time I ever read it. It's in a Guy Gavriel Kay book,
Of course.
Man Lifting a Hammer, and it was in that exact book, actually, the Fionn Tapestry book that I first picked up. And I remember I use it. It's hit twice in Kings of the Wyld, and I remember I used it right near the beginning of the book to describe like the passage of the sun, and
Mhm.
then I would try to use it again throughout writing, and I was like, no, I can't. You can't use this word. I can use it twice, but I can't use it 3 times in a book. That's ridiculous. It's too, like, it's too weird a word. And so every time I would measure it against the previous one, and it'd be like, nope, this one is better. And so now it's at the beginning and it's at the end, and yeah, I mean, I've put down books. I've been reading books. I've been 4 books into a series, and the author used the word vast 5 times in, I think, 2 or 3 pages, and I closed the book and will never read them again. Like, I'm not doing it.
It's like your vocabulary OCD. Just
Yeah, just like I gotta care a little bit, and it's pretty rare the book that I listen to or read where I'm like, oh, this was just perfect. There was none of this word choice. But sometimes, and I think I'm too concerned about it, because I read great books that I love, and there'll be points where I'm like, really, you just used, like you said, the word like deliverance twice, like, and they weren't. If it's a style thing, great, use it twice. But if it's not, then for God's sake, change it. But this
dude.
person put out 20 books in the time that I put out 0, so
eh,
more power to them.
This is fine. I mean, do you think this is kind of like a mix of craft and creativity coming together, where it's like the craft side of you is saying be conscious of your word choice, and the creative side of you is sort of saying these are the words that I want to use and I could use, but it's not necessarily like there's any guidance unless I have the craft coming in to say, wait 5 pages, wait 10 pages, don't fucking use that word again.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's something that I weigh all the time. Like, and it obviously depends on the word, but yeah, I'm pretty conscious of it. And my brother is, luckily, because he's my first proofreader,
Yeah.
he's always like, he uses that line from Dumb and Dumber where it's like, you can't triple this, a double this, or whatever. Every single time he catches it, he's like, you can't triple concise, a double concise, whatever word I've used twice. Uh,
But I mean, it's really good that you have your brother who's sort of eagle-eyed in that sort of way to be your first proofreader, your sort of, I wouldn't even call it like beta reader. He's like your zeta reader
yeah,
of sorts.
yeah. No, I'm lucky to
To
have him. He can sometimes be a bit too, you want someone that's critical of stuff, and he can be critical of stuff, but he's definitely the person that's at least, he's just like, this is great, this is great, this is great. With him, I know more what to not take out, as opposed to what to take out.
yeah, I mean that's the perfect thing. I mean, how is it for you in terms of going through the sort of beta reading process and then editing and revisions and all that? Like how has that been for you?
Well, I haven't done it too many times, but in my limited experience, I mean, it's been pretty good, and I think it's because I am so nitpicky about stuff. Um, like, and I was very, very nervous of it when Kings of the Wyld, like when I gave my extra, my cut it out, like when I did my changes for my agent, I was so nervous that she'd be like, I've made a mistake. I'm not going to represent you after all. Same with my editor when they wanted 50,000 words added, and I turned that in, and I was like, oh my God, they're gonna cancel it.
Yeah.
Um, and then um, with Bloody Rose, I mean, I turned it in. It was past deadline, but not that far past deadline, but pretty past deadline. And so I turned it in as soon as I was done it, and I didn't really get a chance to really like nitpick it myself. I did a little bit, but not as much as I would have liked to.
Mhm.
So by the time I got the edits back, I had gone through it again and changed a lot of stuff. Nothing huge, but just small word choices and things like that, which isn't necessarily the way they would like it done, but it worked out. There was three of us. I had a new editor named Bradley on the second one, and Emily from the UK. So that time we all worked together on it.
Mhm.
And I just kind of like, I don't know, I wrote Bloody Rose pretty slow, and I wrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it. And so when I turned it in, like my edit letter, I hear a lot of horror stories about edit letters, and I'm sure I'll get one day that's like, I need to rewrite this whole book. But when I turned in Bloody Rose, Bradley was like, this is a home run. We love it. It's great. A couple changes here and there. So that was obviously very nice to hear.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into the mindset that will always be the case, because it definitely won't be. But I was lucky in that case. That case was just like, here's a couple changes. I had mentioned a couple things that I thought might be changed, and they were like, no, this is fine. And yeah, they were pretty effusive about it when I turned it in. So
Yeah. And how is that degree of confidence and everything that you sort of accrued over the two books? How is that sort of translating into the third book, Outlaw Empire? And and in terms of the state that it's in right now, I know you've done extensive edits on your own as opposed to edits with the editors, but how has the process been? And
I think it's slowing it down considerably, because I don't know, like when a lot of people go back and read their old stuff and they don't like it, or they pull it apart. And to be honest, when I go back and read Kings of the Wild and Bloody Rose, I love it. I just love every page. There's like one sentence in Kings of the Wild on the very first page that I would change a word in it.
Mhm.
Everything else, flawless. um, um, but it's funny because I sometimes I read it and I'm like, oh, I would nitpick that now, but I'm like, but it's fine. It just works. And so, yeah, it's kind of making me probably nitpick this one too much, because I would like the same response when I turn it in.
Mhm.
It's great the way it is, but at the same time, it's probably best that I just turn in something regardless of what its shape is, and let them help me remold it.
Yeah, kind of get some outside perspectives on what you've written so far.
Yeah, and in my head, I kind of don't want to. You don't want to fuck it up. If you've written two books I'm really proud of them, and um, I'm like, yes, it's great that I can like make a living writing at the moment, but I'm not in it for the money. I'm in
Mhm.
it for nothing more than when someone reads those books, it's like, this was me, and this was my feelings on things. These are people that I created,
Yeah.
and this is what I'm leaving behind. And so, I'm not going to leave behind something that uses the word vast 5 times in 2 pages. I'm not going to fucking do it.
I mean,
Like,
it's like Guy Gavriel Kay in the Sarantine
yeah,
Mosaic. It's about the legacy that you're leaving behind and the fact that you don't want to push out.
yeah,
Sorry to some authors, but a lot of trash gets pushed out into the market, and
yeah. And the thing is, a lot of it's very easily enjoyable, and my books are far from perfect, but they're perfect to me.
mhm.
So yeah, they're far from, they don't work for everybody, but they're exactly what I wanted them to be.
And they're reflections of you. I mean, just from knowing you and reading those books. I actually lent both of them to a friend of mine here in Quito, and he's Ecuadorian, but he speaks English, and he read the books, and he just adores them. He was so, and then I told him, yeah, the author is a friend of mine. He's like, are you fucking kidding me? And he just lost it. It was hilarious. But the thing that stood out to him and the thing that connected us was the sense of humor. And it's like I became friends with him because of our humor just clicked.
Yeah,
And when he read that book, he's like, man, the humor is just on point. It's so good. And I was like, yeah, that's basically Nick. Just like you drink a
yeah,
whiskey with him, and that's what he talks like.
yeah,
And it's really good that there's such a pure essence of you in the books,
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah.
something that's sort of, when someone hears you on a podcast or an interview like this, it's a bit distant and it's weird. But in this case, it's not. It's just, this is how you are and this is how you write, and they merge really well.
Yeah. In real life, I dress like Moog. I act like Madras. I think I'm Clay, and I wish I was Ganelon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you don't play instruments.
Yeah. No.
Oh, but it's okay, man. I mean, it's kind of like this wish fulfillment type of thing that we can do as writers, but at the end of the day, really infuse ourselves into it in a genuine way, and that's the best. That's the best that you can do, really.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm very fortunate enough that I've had very patient editors, that the books have done well enough that they pay off their advance. If they hadn't paid off their advance, I'd be really screwed, just because I would owe them money, you know.
Yeah.
And I still, because I'm just I like to think I'm a decent person. I feel guilty, you know, every day about, for the people that whether they're readers, whether they're editors, whether they're the people on the business side that, you know, are trying to factor this book into their, you know, when it's going to come out. But I can only say from my perspective, like, what I'm interested in putting out is things that I'm proud of.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in just putting out anything.
Yep. I mean, now you understand how Patrick Rothfuss or Scott Lynch or George Martin feel.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I remember I used to, I was stupid back in the day, like waiting for that Scott Lynch book, you know, and I would hear that he was, you know, whether he was having a hard time, and I was like, well, just read your first book, man. That's the cure. That's the cure. That book's so good. Like, how could you, you know? But nowadays, like, that's, someone told me that, I'd be like, fuck you, you don't know. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the matter of the creative versus the consumer. It's this very strange relationship where, from my perspective, just having, you know, been a tattoo artist and doing a lot of different creative work, that I understand that there's misinterpretation on one side, where someone might assume something. Oh, it's easy. You already put out 2 books. What's so difficult about putting out the next one? Well, everything is not the same. Every single book is a different project, much as every tattoo is a different project for me.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult to say, like, oh, these are so easily comparable, because they're not. They're not. So for me, any author that's taking their time with the work, I understand the intention that you have, and that's that you want to put out the best work that you can possible, you know?
Yeah.
And the same goes for Patrick Rothfuss or Scott Lynch or whoever else is leaving a wider and wider gap between the release of their last book and now.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, they're people.
Yeah.
You're not creating something, you're the reader. And fuck you if you think that you have the power to say, oh, I deserve this right now. Because you don't. This person created something for your enjoyment. Be patient if you wish to continue that in the future. It's like,
yeah, it's not. I mean, sometimes I wish it's like, yeah, if you did something for a living that was just like, you could just do it and it would be done. Like, if you put the time in. But writing's not just you put the time in. You have to put. There has to be something else there. At least for me.
Yeah.
And I am very fortunate in the fact that my books are not like a direct sequels. So it's not like people are waiting on a cliffhanger or anything like that. A lot of people didn't even know there was a second book coming out. They don't know there's a third one coming out. And that's great. You know, the only people I'm really concerned, like, so I don't feel like I've left any reader hanging, you know. If they get more in the world, they get more in the world. The only people that I feel bad about disappointing is my editors, ultimately.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like the people who are in the background of the book publishing process.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I have no doubt they forgive you.
Well, they've been phenomenal so far. So
it's like the peak of patience. Oh, man.
Yeah.
No, I can imagine. I mean, it's one thing to sort of, you know, I'm currently writing stuff that's unpublished, but it's kind of a weird thing to think about, that before you're a published writer, you're essentially just a single person creating something. But then once you become published, or in the process to get published, you start to incorporate more and more people, and then all these people are working under this umbrella just to create this single product.
Yeah.
And it's underestimated, I think, the amount of back work that goes into
Oh, totally.
creating something like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially like editors. I mean, I did have some idea of it before I got into it, that how much an editor influenced a book, but it's
Mhm.
very true. And like, if someone says this book had the same editor as another book, it's not just like, oh, they corrected the spelling of the word armor, you know? It's like they're the person that chose to publish that book.
Mhm.
Like, editors like choose to publish a book and then fight for that book with their finance department and their other editors and like champion it.
Mhm.
So if a book has the same editor as a book that you like, then there's a very good chance that you'll like it too, because
Yeah.
that's a person on the other side of that that has decided to go like, this is what I like and this is what I want to see more of in the world.
Exactly. It's like
Um,
all these different souls coming together and to create this thing. So it's not
yeah.
just a reflection of the author; it's a reflection of the agent for representing that author. It's the editor for fighting for that author and editing the book.
And how many people have read Kings of the Wild because of its cover?
Yeah.
Most of them.
Shout out to Richard Anderson. Yeah.
To Richard Anderson.
Oh man. Speaking of which, there's this. I don't know if you've read. I wanted to sort of close this out just to see what you're currently reading or playing in terms of video games or listening to in terms of music. But I don't know if you've read the. Sorry?
But great answers for all three.
Perfect. I don't know if you've read the Carter Archives by Dan Stout.
No.
Oh man, I'm gonna bombard you with this afterwards. But these covers, just
Oh, very cool. Wow, those are nice.
yeah, this is just like the most moody,
I've never even seen that.
amazing. So this is the third one in the series, but
Yeah.
I'll send you some stuff about
Yeah.
the first one, and it's essentially secondary world detective story with like a bunch of different alien races, and it's so good. It's so good.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you reading, Nick?
Well, I'm reading Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I'm pretty early into it, but so far so good. Right before that, I read On Writing by Stephen King,
Good
um,
choice. Good choice.
which is interesting. Yeah. I mean, it was a great book. It would be indispensable, I think, for a new author because so much of it tells you about what you can cut from a book,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's something that new authors just haven't. It takes them a while to grasp. It took me forever to grasp.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think what fantasy book I read right before that. Oh, I just read Daniel Green's book, which was great.
I finished that yesterday too. Breach of
Yeah.
Peace.
I was like, please like this, please like this, because I like Daniel, and a lot for me. So I'm really glad that I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, there were like aspects of the mystery element that I think it could have been a bit longer and it would have served it very well. Like another 30 pages or something like that. Just to sort of like weave certain plot elements together. But the main character like really carried that book for me.
Yeah, yeah,
Inspector Clid, I think it is.
yeah. And if there's going to be more, then I'll read them 100%. Like,
Yeah.
and like, there's so many books that I want to put down because I've become so nitpicky about books now
Yeah.
that I didn't ever think about putting it down because it was great. Like,
Yeah.
Um, and then listening wise, I just finished listening to a book called The Counselor by E.J. Beaton, which was great. She's a poet in real life, and there were a couple lines that were kind of Gaga real K-ish, and I was like, this is pretty good. Um, and now I'm listening to a book called Sword Heart by, I forget what the person's name is. I want to say T.W. Fisher, but it's a pen name, so I can't remember what her real name is.
Okay.
But it comes up a lot when people ask on Reddit and things like that about funny books, and it's hilarious. It's a hilarious book.
It's called Sword Heart.
Sword Heart. It's about a woman who's currently her uncle died and left her this big inheritance, and her family is like keeping her prisoner in a room and wants her to marry her cousin. She's a fucking idiot. And she pulls this sword off the wall. She's trying to kill herself with it,
Yeah.
and pulls it out. And there's like a guy, an old Irish warrior, in the sword, and the two of them escape and go on this adventure together. And
That sounds like the beginning of it sounded very much like Jane Austen, and then it just like veered off into crazy territory.
yeah, yeah. So it's great. And then playing wise, I'm playing just Final Fantasy actually at the moment. My brother and I just resubscribed to Final Fantasy 14, just like the online one. And then there's a remake of Final Fantasy 12, like an HD remaster on the PS4, which I played a little bit of it and put it away, and so I just picked it up yesterday.
Nice.
Now I'm deep into it.
And I saw you were playing Cyberpunk 2077 as well.
Yep.
How was your experience with that? Because I remember you picked it up at launch. I just decided not to buy it because things were a bit messy, and I'm okay with waiting. But how was it for you jumping into the beginning and then taking a break and coming back afterwards?
It was great. I mean, I did take a small break when I heard they were putting this big patch out, and I was like, well, I could play other stuff in the meantime. I mean, Cyberpunk storyline-wise, it's phenomenal. It has got an absolutely incredible storyline. I'm such a sucker for like cityscapes, future cityscapes or cyberpunk cityscapes. I would just like sit there and just like, if I got on a rooftop and it was the right like lighting and element, music sometimes, I would just be like there for 15 minutes probably, just like
staring.
You know, it's just, I love that. And I hope we don't like live in a dystopian future, but if we do, then at least it'll be some nice views. So storyline wise, it was great, but they really, it's fucking ugly as hell sometimes, like the graphics in the PS4.
Yeah.
And so halfway through, I took a break. Me and a buddy came to visit, and we played Spider-Man, which is phenomenal.
The Miles Morales, right?
No, that was like a mini sequel to this Spider-Man.
The original one you played.
Yeah. So it was a couple of years. It came out a year or so, 2 years before Miles Morales. I think Miles Morales is like an even shorter game. Like even Spider-Man's only about 20 hours.
Yeah.
I think Miles Morales is maybe like 10 or something. But it was phenomenal, and it looked beautiful compared to when I went back to Cyberpunk, it's got all the pieces there. Like you can see the mist, the fog rolling out of gutters, like so many amazing pieces. And if you just like glance at it, it's gorgeous. But if you look at it,
ugly as hell.
All the textures are ugly. So hopefully it's still a great game. I didn't encounter any like game-breaking bugs or anything like that. Very cool story, amazing cars. You know, they've screwed the radio up to no end. Like, when you look at something like Grand Theft Auto was doing it right, like in the year 2000s, like they fucked that part up so bad.
Yeah.
But it's good, and if there's a second Cyberpunk, it's going to be even better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna jump in at some point. I think I'm gonna give it until the fall, and then I'll jump in. And sort of see what state it's in at that point. Because it's like I've been going through a backlog of just so much stuff that I missed over the course of the PS4.
Yeah.
Like I recently played through the first two Tomb Raider games.
Oh yeah.
And now I'm playing the third, and they're just like excellent, like super solid.
Yeah.
And the way that they progress from each game to the next is like a really nice iterative sort of build up.
Yeah.
And then I've got like the Hitman games that I've never played. And then the last Assassin's Creed, the Viking one, Valhalla, that I've been wanting to play as well. So it's kind of like, it's been difficult to get like a PS5 or the new Xbox, for instance. But I don't know if you're in this similar boat to me, where it's kind of like, well, there's a ton of stuff I missed, and a lot of it's really good, so I might as well just kind of take a look at the.
Need a PS5 to play, or that will be that much better on a PS5, which granted Cyberpunk would probably be. Yeah. But I don't feel the pressing need to get one at the moment. And I'm like, I'm finishing all this backlog. With me, it's more like old role-playing game series I never like got into. Like there's a series called The Tales, like Tales of Vesperia.
Yeah.
Estonia. So I recently, just a couple days ago, I finished Tales of Berseria, which is like has phenomenal characters, but I fucking hated it. I hated it. Like I loved it and hated it because the characters were so good, but the game was so boring. Everything about it was so
Just the
boring.
mechanics, the gameplay, everything.
Fighting was bad. It was too easy or else too complex. There was way too much of it. And I'm fine with like random battles, but it was just the dungeons were uninspired, just open, empty spaces. And yeah, it went on and on and on. Like it could have been such a more concise story. Your inventory was just like a clusterfuck of the same item, like repeated a billion times with slightly different stats. It was just so annoying. Going back and playing the remastered Final Fantasy 12, like I loved Final Fantasy 12 when it first came out, but now this one just seems like a masterpiece in comparison.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was good. Don't get me wrong. And like one of these days, I want to go back and play. There's a game called Tales of Vesperia that I was halfway through that I loved because the main characters were like, main character in Berseria is like bad, but like performatively bad. Like, oh, she's on a quest for revenge. She's just over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Tales of Vesperia, it would be like you do something. There'd be a merchant that like got away with something, even though he wasn't a nice guy. And then later that night, your main character would like meet him on a bridge and fucking stab him in the gut and throw him off the bridge.
Holy shit.
Like, and then be totally normal again the next day. And it was like, that's good.
That's a monster. That's like psychopathic behavior.
It was good. It was like stuff that you were like glad it happened. And then there's a series called Trails of, I think maybe just called the Trails series. And it's like Trails in the Sky and then Trails of Cold Steel. Mm-hmm. Altogether, there's like 8 games.
Wow.
And I want to kind of like try to get into them. So,
man, you got lots of stuff. Did you ever play the Mass Effect games?
Oh my God, yeah.
Are you gonna pick up the Legendary Edition?
No, I think I'm done with them. Like I loved them. Like Mass Effect 2 is my favorite game of all time.
Yeah.
By far. But I did have to play it twice because when I got Mass Effect 3, I accidentally erased my data from Mass Effect 2.
So you wanted to transfer everything over.
Yeah, and I fucked it up and I erased everything. So I had to go back. I had my Mass Effect 1 data, so I had to play through 2 again.
Oh, man. I mean, that's not such a bad thing.
No, because it's the best game ever.
Yeah.
But I'm just done with it. Like I don't have time to replay old games. There's so many new games I want to play.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. I love that it exists. I just don't see me doing it. I mean, granted, I'm literally replaying Final Fantasy 12 right now, but I feel like there's way more different in this one than there is in Mass Effect.
Yeah. No, I'm in the same boat as you. It's kind of like I have such fond memories of it that I don't want to like overly rely on nostalgia to compel me to play this, as opposed to sort of souring these amazingly sweet memories that I have of these games from back in the day.
Yeah, and I haven't heard that there's no new characters as far as I know. There's no new anything. Like as far as I know, it's just like the main draw is Mass Effect 1 with better graphics.
Yeah, and better gameplay. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas like say Final Fantasy 12, they redid the entire like the way you choose your class and your jobs. That's all different.
So it's like a remake versus a remaster kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean, this one's like a remaster, but I guess apparently like a year after it came out in North America, Final Fantasy 12, they re-released it in Japan with a better system to do your classes, and they never did it. They never released it in North America. So this one has like a refurbished version of that system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it's just cool. Like Final Fantasy 12, if you've never played it, it does suffer from like lack of a great bad guy, even though I'm trying to appreciate it more this time around. But it's got great characters. It's pretty much where I got the idea for having people with bunny ears that it could be cool.
Yeah.
You know? And it's very, very, very much like it is like an homage to Star Wars. Like it's got like
really,
it's like a Luke Skywalker. It's got Sky Pirate. He's got a sidekick, but instead of Chewbacca, it's like a rabbit-eared woman that's extremely capable and awesome.
So cool.
Yeah, and the music's great. Everything about it, the detail, every culture feels like realistic. It's a good game.
I mean, I haven't played a Final Fantasy since think the original 7.
Yeah, yeah,
I didn't even play the remake that they released. I think last year was it,
yeah.
something like that.
You need a PS5. Just play that. It's fucking way better than Cyberpunk.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Yeah,
and there's too much good stuff. There's too much good stuff.
really.
Yeah. And what about music? What have you been listening to? I know you're sort of delving into a lot of grunge and hip hop while you're writing Outlaw Empire.
Yeah, a lot of hip hop. So like for at least for the writing aspect of it, it's a lot of. I mean, primarily it's groups like Wu-Tang Clan, Nas, and pretty much every single offshoot of the Wu-Tang Clan, like like Jizza and RZA and Raekwon, like all their albums are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And different than what I was ingesting in the 90s. I was ingesting like, yeah, there's like Biggie because he had catchy lyrics and things like that. But these are albums that are like snapshots of people's lives.
Hmm.
They're different. They're
Or
different.
like the original Outcast albums
Yeah.
are just
Oh, phenomenal. Phenomenal. Yeah. Yeah. They're great. And they were like, yeah, there's a lot of funny stories about Outcast, like living in their basement and
mhm.
but then just very, 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 very recently, I discovered there was a brand new Greta Van Fleet album. And are you familiar with Greta
Yeah,
Van
yeah.
Fleet?
No, you introduced me to them.
Yeah, they're the band that gets flack for sounding like Led Zeppelin.
I mean, it's
And
it's like the perfect replication of Led Zeppelin. Yeah,
yeah, but different enough to be like new. And it's
yeah,
just like, I just want to tell everyone who hates them to fuck off. And there are a lot of people that do hate them, but
yeah.
just like, so they have a brand new album called like Battle at Garden Gate. And it is so good. Like,
No, I didn't.
so,
I didn't. I don't know why there's like no promotion for this.
no. And apparently they have a pretty good producer with it, like with them this time around.
Hmm.
It's incredible. There's some incredible songs on there. There's 2 of them that people like really love, but every song on there has something cool to it.
Yeah.
And especially the last song on the album, like I hadn't listened to it yet, and someone was like, "Oh, that song is great, eh?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'll give it a shot." And I remember I was lying in bed listening to it, and about halfway through, it ends. You that slow, like drawn out drum beat that
Hmm.
so many rock songs happens, and I'm like, it was pretty good. And then all of a sudden, it begins, and the second half of the song starts, and my jaw just dropped. I'm like, "What the fuck is this?" And if you YouTube like live, what the song is called, "The Weight of Dreams" live,
Yeah.
you will see, and the whole thing is amazing because they riff at the beginning and they riff in the middle, but the
Hmm.
guitar solo is unreal.
Well, that's so reflective of like I mean, the era of Led Zeppelin and bands like that, where it's like
Yeah,
there was enough, there was enough patience and respect for the music to be like, okay, so like 15-minute song, I'm down.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
go for
I
it.
mean, it's only the original song's 8 minutes long, but the live version, which you should look up, is 15 minutes, and it's fucking phenomenal.
Awesome, dude. I'm so
Absolutely
excited.
phenomenal. And like any good guitar solo, it technically is also a drum solo, like in the background.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so today I listened to it while walking, and it wasn't the live version; it was the regular one. But just listening to the drums, and then right afterwards, I put on the guitar solo from Stairway to Heaven, and just
Hmm.
listened to the drums. And they're both just like, you don't realize it, but they're such the star of the show.
Yeah.
Like if the guitar is like the cresting wave, then the drums are like the Leviathan rising beneath the ocean that's making that wave. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't exist. It's like, oh man, I'm pretty excited about it. And I purposely, like, I looked up like what kind of reviews the album got, and it's just like middle of the road. Rolling Stone like called the lyrics uninspired, and I was like, I went and I recalled like when Led Zeppelin first came out that a lot of music reviewers, especially Rolling Stone, said shitty things about them.
Hmm.
I looked up, and it is almost word for word the review of Led Zeppelin and the review of this
Greta
album.
Van Fleet.
They both exactly say something like vague or uninspired lyrics.
Yeah. Well, man, as someone who's worked in the music journalism industry, I can say that so much of it is fluff and bullshit.
Yeah,
So it's like it's one of the most, it's one of those forms of journalism that is so subjective.
yeah,
You can't even like fake objectivity in
yeah,
music journalism.
yeah.
And so all of it is dependent on an individual's taste, you know, and just like literature, fantasy, science fiction, all these kinds of things. It's like one man's shit is another man's treasure, and
Yeah.
you just gotta love what you love, man.
Because I mean, I guarantee just on the most recent cover of Rolling Stone has BTS on the cover, and
Yeah,
like I love me some K-pop. You know, I'm way more of a fucking G Dragon Big Bang fan, but I love it. I love it so much.
oh
But
man,
like the word band is, it's misused
it's debatable. Yeah,
unless someone plays instruments. And then yeah, so the fact that it might have been in the same issue, somebody trashing Greta Van Fleet while BTS was on the cover, and like I got nothing against BTS. I
yeah.
love this, but it's just like you're just being, it is like you said.
It's trends. Honestly, a lot of it is trends too. It's like, what's the hot thing right now? And for some reason in North America, K-pop is just blowing up.
I love it. I think it's
Yeah,
great.
yeah. I mean, for me, it's like the entertainment value is off the charts.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Everything about it, the personas, the creativity, the costuming, the fashion, it's all kind of tied into it too,
it's like anime, but in music form.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, no better way to end than on K-pop.
Really, really. I think this is where this is going all along.
Oh man, all roads lead to K-pop, of
Yeah.
course. Well, dude, it's been an absolute pleasure, and
Yeah.
man, thank you for taking the time and for dishing all kinds of random stuff with me.
Of course, I'm sorry for my bunk lighting, and I hope that if anyone watches this all the way through,
It's
they
fine.
find it enjoyable.
It's fine. It's fine. I'm gonna do this in two parts, I think, because we have been talking for a long time. And it's like it's fine, man. The lighting is okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's all subjective, anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I don't get to tell people this very often, but you're one of those few people who I can genuinely say has been a role model for me. So, um,
I appreciate that. I'm honored,
yeah,
and as you are to me, man.
thank you, man. All right, buddy. Well, I'll talk to you soon, and take care. Yeah, all the best to you and your family. Okay.
You too.
Yeah.